I know people in the political sphere through some of the nonprofit work I've done, through school, through things like that. And people are telling me that the U.S. government's making tons of preparations with supplies. For example, they're moving military stuff around in the U.S. The political sense in Europe is that whole thing's about to erupt into some sort of war around Russia, Ukraine, but extending into some of the NATO countries. You've got countries trying to desperately get into NATO. What's going on in Syria, Turkey and Syria and Russia are all aligning. You're starting to see, it's almost biblical, and I don't want to go there on this program, but I will tell you this, there have been some prophecies about things that you will see happen that have started to happen with geopolitical alignment in the Middle East that are starting to worry people, that they're like, they didn't want this to happen. And I think even people in the United States didn't want to see it happen. Even though the United States probably antagonizes that region more than anybody else, they didn't want to see it happen. Like, it's gone too far. And the Bidens pushed it too far. They're not the only ones to blame. I'm just saying, as of recently, they pushed it too far. And they're trying to pull it back, and they can't now. Like I said, that powder keg has been lit. That whole area has been lit. It's lit, and the people there know it. The United States is quietly prepping for a wartime environment, especially in the defense industry, but that's being pushed out to other industries as well. So you can kind of see that all forming, and a lot of people that are kind of connected to this going, I don't know if I want to be here.
You're watching Capital Cause, and my name is Danny, and today's guest is Rob Kientz. Rob, thank you so much for coming back on the show, my friend.
Yeah, anytime. Always happy to join your channel.
For sure. Yeah, it's always a pleasure having you on. Let's just dive right in, Rob. What is your top story at the moment? What is occupying your headspace? What should be on the radar screen of every investor out there?
You know, it's hard to give one answer. I'll give you one, but I think that there's probably a top five.
Yeah, go
The
for
one,
it.
probably the most recent, is going to be the Fed cutting rates, and they're cutting rates into rising inflation, which is going to confuse a lot of people. Certainly, that's what the stock market always wants. But the potential consequences of them doing that, cutting twice this year into a rising inflation environment. Now, it's not rising a lot. We're not double digits. I don't want to over dramatize it, but this is, are they placating the market? I think potentially so. But what I see is that the underlying fundamentals are so weak that they're easing into that to try to help it out. I think they know that we're in a recession. I'll say non-technical because CPI is positive, but if you look at real inflation, we're in a recession. We've been for 2 years. I think also the yield curve inversion of the 2 and 10-year bond rates have said that we've been in a recession for quite a while. They were inverted for almost 2 solid years. So, we're not really growing substantially. Everybody out in that's working in this economy, has a job, understands that. Business owners who can't expand sales and are getting eaten alive by inflation know that. And I think the Fed is saying one thing and doing another, but it's confusing the heck out of the market. And so you've seen stock market crashes. I think the Dow was down like 1,000 points at one point yesterday because the market's seeing two things. It's cognitive dissonance. They're seeing what the Fed is saying, and they're seeing what inflation is doing, and then they see what the Fed is doing. And I think what the Fed is doing is indicative of the fact that the Fed sees this big, massive, ugly recession coming, and they're trying to hold things up. And, how long they'll be able to hold it up, I don't know. I think 2025 is going to be a very interesting year from a Fed and an interest rate perspective and an inflation perspective. How they react, how much, powder they have. They're down, I think, maybe below 5, right at 5 or just below 5. So they're sitting at that point where they can't really cut more because they need all of that for the recession, typically in history. So I feel like they've done what they could to slow down this crash that's coming, but it's just going to it's not going to help. The crash will come. It'll be here. And the only question is when. I'm just sitting here going, when's it going to happen? One other thing I'll throw on top of that, I was at Bitcoin MENA in Abu Dhabi last week, and I'm telling you, not only are the Bitcoiners, but the government and everybody's saying this Bitcoin reserve. We've got states passing legislation or looking at legislation to do it. We've got Trump wanting to do it, and that administration wanting to do it. Vivek is certainly on board with that. Everybody's wanting Bitcoin to save the day, and they're pushing people into that asset. And I just sense this desperation. I feel like the powers that be know something is seriously wrong. And I just sense desperation. And I sense it no matter where I go. And people are hitting the panic button. And people at the Bitcoin conferences and on social media for Bitcoin are panicking. Like there is this underlying panic starting to well up. You can just feel it. And you can feel by these sort of desperation moves. Like, who would have ever thought 10 years ago that the US government and the states of this union were going to turn to Bitcoin to solve the dollar problem? Not in 1,000 years would I've ever that ever would have been on my bingo card. And that's what they're doing, and it's desperation. What the Fed is doing is desperation, and they're trying to keep it under, the lid, keep it the lid on it. And what they're doing with Bitcoin is desperation. And I just sense this desperation building. And we're at the point at which I think everybody kind of knows, but nobody wants to say the quiet part out loud.
Are you referring to Bitcoin and Tether's connection to USTs, to US Treasuries?
Yeah, well, there's that connection. So if you
Yeah.
look at Tether, it's not all backed by the dollar, and there's a lot of money that flows in and out of treasuries, and they also have a bunch of other paper crap in there. And why people for years, like a good friend of mine, Dezo Games, has been pounding on the Tether table for years, saying this is a scam. I think somebody at the University of Texas years ago, like 10 or 15 years ago, said, I have concerns over Tether, like right after it started. So Tether is not this stable thing. And yes, there's some sort of incestuous relationship between Tether and the US government, which I don't think has been fully explored. But yeah, the government's using crypto for a lot of, to support its treasury market, to support the dollar potentially with Bitcoin. And I see this as being a gigantic failure. It's taking one fiat Ponzi asset and trying to support another fiat Ponzi asset, because that's all the government understands is fiat Ponzi assets. They don't get anything else.
Yeah, and just to kind of add some color for those who may not know, effectively, if you buy Bitcoin through Tether, Tether is backed by U.S. Treasuries, or at least parts of it are. And so
Yep.
when you're buying Bitcoin, essentially you're buying the Treasury. You're
Yep.
buying the U.S. Treasury, and you're propping up the bond market. And this is extremely relevant given today's circumstances where you have China letting a lot of their treasuries expire, Japan doing the same thing. I mean, they need buyers. And it does appear with Trump, talking about things like a strategic Bitcoin reserve, things like that to keep the Bitcoin price up, essentially creates buyers for the treasury market. I mean, is that
Mhm.
how you see it as well?
Pretty much what's going on. And like I said, using a 15-year-old fiat Ponzi asset, I consider a Ponzi asset in its current form. Now, Bitcoin, if it went back to the original vision, could be not money, because it's not a store of value, but could be a potential electronic currency. Most of that value being in the blockchain than the coin itself. But in its current iteration, Bitcoin's a mess. When I went to Bitcoin Nashville, the lead developer came out and said, we have 3 or 4 existential threats to Bitcoin, which if don't get solved, this thing's cratering. That's one of the lead
Hmm.
developers for Bitcoin saying Bitcoin's in existential danger of cratering. And yet they're using that to prop up the debt and the
Well, why
treasury and the
is
dollar
that?
markets.
What's the danger? Why is it in danger of cratering?
Well, the small block issue where they can't get transactions through, it costs a lot, and it's pushing people into the Lightning Network, which is basically a banker's network. It's a hub and spoke model. The fact that the mining power behind Bitcoin has been concentrated into these large mining pools, which are being controlled. The fact that the development of Bitcoin itself is being controlled by very small groups of developers, which are making decisions which do not align with the original vision that Satoshi put in the white paper. Those are 3 off the top of my head that are existential threats, any of which can derail BTC, what people call Bitcoin, that fork of Bitcoin, which all the money is in. It could totally derail it. And this is being talked about at the conferences. And when I went to MENA last week, a lot of the people were like, we're doing all this development, especially on the Lightning Network, the Layer 2 network, to facilitate all this lending and, propping big. And, here's the thing about Bitcoin. Everybody wants it to be the best currency in the world, the most valued asset in the world. And now the sovereigns are using it as their savior of their entire economic system. That's not what Bitcoin was designed for. And it ain't going to serve all those roles. It can't. So the Bitcoin hysteria right now is a sign that the governments are desperate because it's not designed to do all these things. But they're desperate and they're turning to anything other than gold and silver, unfortunately, to solve their problems. In fact, they've talked about revaluing to the true price of gold. Trump said this in his speech at Bitcoin Nashville, revaluing gold to its true price and then buying Bitcoin with it. Well, why don't you just revalue gold to its true price and back up the dollar with gold? Because they probably don't have the gold and it's just a paper thing because we probably don't have it. We haven't audited in 60 years. We don't know if it's in Fort Knox. It's probably been leased or released and rehypothecated. So they can't actually do that with gold. So they're doing this paper trick of saying, well, we're going to revalue gold and then buy Bitcoin and then support the dollar in the treasury market. The emperor is so naked right now and has no clothes, running down the streets, streaking across America. It's ugly. It is desperation. It is ugly right now.
Yeah, I just did an interview with Eric Young that came out recently, and he was showing me data that pretty much inferred that China had secretly been buying 10 to 1 more gold than it had been, saying to the public.
Oh yeah.
And
I
so, I mean,
estimated an article I wrote for a bullion dealer about a year and a half ago. I estimated that if you look at what China produces and the fact that none of it ever leaves the country and they buy externally, the only thing that ever leaves the country goes to Hong Kong for jewelry, and most of that comes back. So maybe 0.5% of gold ever leaves China from their domestic production, and then they buy more on top of it, and it all stays. And it's a lot of it goes to the people. Maybe about a thirdish goes to the people. A chunk goes to the central bank where they have official reserves, and then the rest goes to their sovereign wealth fund or to other government accounts that they don't have to report publicly. And if that's true for the last 20 years, when you look at the in and out flows, they have at least 25,000 tons, either owned by their citizenry or the government. 25,000 tons.
yeah.
That's what the U.S. used to have before they inflated the dollar and had to take us off the gold standard. We had 27. Now we supposedly have 8. I don't think we have that. And China has at least 25,000 tons. Russia's been buying it hand over fist. They did the gold to oil thing where they could sell their oil, stabilize their currency, and intake a bunch of gold. So Russia's been sucking gold out of the market for ever since the U.S. put sanctions on them. Who knows how much they've got? Yeah, the BRICS
Yeah.
nations have more gold than the U.S. for sure.
Yeah, and just kind of put more context into that, guys. I mean, total world gold production annually sits at around 2,000 to 2,100 tons of gold. So
Mhm.
25,000 tons of gold by way of China is effectively 10 years worth of gold production. So just kind of paint that picture there. Rob, I mean, this kind of begs the question: if China's buying gold, Russia's buying gold, why doesn't the U.S. government get in on the action? So, yeah, they might increase the price. It might spike the price, and that could be catastrophic. But they still do have the paper market. I mean, can't they just manipulate the paper market and keep the prices down while they just store more gold?
They could. Now, if the U.S. wanted to be honest and they didn't care about propping the dollar, the reason they want to prop the dollar in Treasury is because it finances all these political careers and it makes them rich. If you look at all the congressmen that go in with $100,000 net worth and come out with $25 million net worth, it's because it's all the Ponzi printing and the fact that they can front run all the stocks because they know the legislation is going to be passed. This corruption has been known for the last few years. So, and also it pays for other social programs, it pays for their war. So they don't want true fiscal honesty, and they don't want true monetary honesty because if they do, they have to cut everything back that got them elected, all the promises they made, and the economy would crash. So they still could, if they wanted to, print an extra 300 or 400 billion, which is nothing these days. We're at 36 trillion in debt. Print an extra half a trillion. Who the hell cares? It's a mess anyway. And they could go buy a bunch of gold very quietly in the markets. By the way, there's ways you can do this without spiking the gold price because the derivative markets is a paper trade. You don't have to go to COMEX to get all that. You can go to the mines. You can go to the LBMA. You can go all sorts of places. You can go to the artisanal mines. You can go to the Dubai market that trades, the Shanghai market, which trades a lot of physical. And those don't determine the world spot price. They're secondary markets, not in terms of their legitimacy, but in terms of determining the price that we all pay. That's determined by the COMEX and LBMA. The U.S. government can get it anytime they want
Yeah.
it.
Through the cancel on effect.
Anytime, and it would not crash the system immediately because they could do it undercover, and then they could come out and announce that they have all this gold, and they would be able to stand up to the other people, but they're not doing it because they don't care. To me, I think Congress and most of the people in the administration know this thing is broken, and they're trying to keep the Titanic from sinking right now, but they know it's coming, and their choice is the central bank digital currencies. because if you go to gold, it requires them to be honest. If you go to central bank digital currencies, that's another fiat system, electronic, which actually gives them more power than the dollar system does. And they've clearly chosen that system. Clearly. Because what are they doing? They're getting into Bitcoin. They're encouraging Bitcoin. They're encouraging what? The digital. Because why? They can do the same games with digital that they could do with the fiat dollar, and they don't have to go back to that pesky gold standard, which required people to balance budgets and to live within their means and to not to promise the world and not to get rich of all the trading they're doing. That, Biden came out this week and said, well, perhaps we shouldn't let Congress trade stocks while they're making policy. Well, gee, maybe it's a little bit too late there, Biden. Maybe you shouldn't have done that in the first place. But that's why we have the issue that we have. They're all getting enriched by it. And when they can print easy money and cheap debt to their corporate cronies who give them all these PAC donations to get them elected, see, that's how that system works. It's all like bribes and okay, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. They don't want to reverse that system because it takes away their power. And what do people get into Congress for? It's for power. They want power. People that are drawn to that, even the ones that get in for the right reasons, by the time they come out, it's all greed and power. 99% of Congress at the federal level, it's all about greed and power. It's corruption. The only way that I've seen, and I'm saying this potentially getting in trouble because I'm sitting on a couple of leadership committees that work with Washington, D.C. But it's what I see on those committees, and it's what I see there that, and then I see the state level, you can work more at the state level. The federal level is a mess. It's corrupt. They don't want to go to any honest system. Could we do it? Sure. We would still have pain. You're still going to have a debt default. But if you had that gold, it would allow you to quickly reverse course, go back into manufacturing, build your economy. But they don't want that. That's not what it's about for them at the federal level. That part of government is lost to me. And I don't know what changes it other than a crash and a flushing of the system.
Interesting. What do you make of the current gold action right now? I mean, it sold off pretty well after Jerome Powell's announcement the other day.
Yeah.
Why is gold selling off despite rate cuts?
It's selling off because gold ran this year real hard. If you look at the chart of gold in 2024, that was the hardest it's run in a year period over 50 years, meaning it didn't have strong pullbacks. And the way that it hit that last Fibonacci, when you graph the 50-year chart and you do all your technical indicators and you do your Fibonacci's, which is just like a measure of what zone are you in this bull market. So the last Fibonacci is where you had the 50-year breakout, and it just went bam, and it went faster than I've ever seen this gold market in 50 years. And so, yeah, when you have the most concentrated, quickest shot upward on a technical chart of gold in a year that we've seen in 50 years, which is what happened, then there's going to be a pullback. And because it's not physical, it's not like we're in the turkey market and the gold price is determined by the fiscal, which, by the way, that's a 7,000-year-old market, and that's how it's determined. The banks call the bullion dealers for the price, not the other way around. Here, the bullion dealers call the banks because the banks are trading paper, and they built up so much short paper, they had to short cover. They had to bring it back down. And it's something I posted on Twitter yesterday. In gold, the bullion banks, which are the largest shorters and have been for years, it's on the COT report. It's on the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency Report. We know the 4 banks are doing it. They're named. Okay. That short position is 8-to-1 short to long on gold in the bullion banks. 8-to-1. And they're not the ones producing it. They're not the mines. They're not Samsung using it. Certainly they have some clients, but there's enough legitimate hedging to cover world production for 6 months at a time in that market. The bullion banks aren't hedging. They're not hedging prices for price risk. They're gambling. And they had so much of a short position they had to cover. And so they did. And they brought the price down. And I suspect the cover for that is the recovery, that the stocks are doing well, that they can justify gold not going up, and that inflation is relatively tame, and the Fed has just cut, and the Fed has provided cover for the economy not to crash this year, which that has provided cover for the shorts in the commodities, namely gold and silver, but some others like sugar and oil, to cover their shorts. It's provided air cover for them to pull some of that short paper off the market. But there's so much short paper, we may be sitting in a sideways gold market for the next 3 or 4 months until the next big crisis. And I think that's probably where we're going to be. Gold could shoot up, it could fall $100, but those are going to be short-term moves. I'm talking about, and what it's really going to do, it's going to eventually go up, but it could sit here in sideways trade in $100 to $200 range for the next 3 or 4 months until something in the economy, something with the banking system, something with a war, a big, news event comes out, which forces the market back up again. But the derivative traders, the shorts, hold that market. They're holding it right now. They've got the power in it. The position limits they're supposed to be enforced on that market are not enforced, so they just dump as much paper as they want, and they've got the Fed to cover them, and they've got the retort coming out of the administration to cover them. So they're like, okay, we saw it rise. Let's take profits. Let's get out of this position, reposition. And a repositioning when you're that short takes a few months. So to me, because I know they control the short end of the market and it's going to take months to unwind and reposition, I don't know that gold's going to explode forward anytime soon unless Bank X over here goes under, or we get into another war, or you have like a bond market or a mortgage market collapse or something like that. I think that's probably where gold's going to sit for a little while.
I see. Well, do you think that Trump effectively inherited a hot potato here? I mean, is there any way out of the next 4 years without seeing like a doom crisis, market crash, bond market crash, etc.?
You know, we're at the most indebted we've been in history, and we're past a point of no return, which is 90% debt to GDP. I think we got to 140. We're like a 120, 30, something like that. Historically, according to the research by Reinhart Rogoff, no chance of recovery. They're going to either debt default or print their way out. Now, how long that takes, the dollar's been resilient because it was a world reserve currency. It was the petrodollar trade. We did have the U.S. military everybody thought was invincible. A lot of those have started to unwind. We've seen de-dollarization for the first time in November. I think for the first time since the dollar became the world reserve currency, we had less than 50% of SWIFT transactions in the dollar for the first time, I think, ever, that at least what I saw on the chart. So we've already come under 50% of current transactions being in the dollar. Now, certainly world reserves are still above 50%, but they've fallen precipitously the last couple of years. And the central banks have already said we're getting rid of dollars. And so it comes first in the transfers in the SWIFT system, and then that affects the balance sheets. And once those balance sheets fall under 50%, it's going to be a race to the bottom for the dollar. So we're sitting in the sort of that last couple of stages before the dollar really starts to collapse as that world reserve currency. And then you also have the BRICS setting up their own trade networks. You have them building their own militaries. You have them building their own gold market. The BRICS have their own gold market now. Now, why do they need that? They have a Dubai market, a Russian market, an Indian market, a little one in Brazil, and a Shanghai. But they decided, no, let's build a big one. Why would they build a big commodities market, especially gold and silver? Because it allows them to back their currency with gold and silver. It allows them to take over for what are going to be defunct COMEX and LBMA markets for gold and silver. And it's going to put them front and center of the financial markets. The rise of the BRICS as a financial power. All of these things are saying that the dollar era is on its way out. And it's all being built right now. And on the flip side of that, you have the CBDCs, which they're finalizing their testing for around the world, 138 countries participating, sitting there going, we've got the next one ready. So you see all those signs, and then you see the debt, and you see the fact that they're getting desperate with trying to do the Bitcoin shenanigans and Tether and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, yeah, this isn't the empire at the last stages of this current financial regime in this American empire and in the world financial schema, if you will. And so, yeah, we're on the way out. We don't know when. Did Trump inherit ticking time? Oh, hell yeah. Because what did the last administration do? They eased. They let people in for free. They let the economy just implode. They put all these restrictions on mining and on businesses, small business. I'm a member of the Small Business Association, the one that lobbies at the federal level. And we're just looking at their policies going, are you absolutely insane? They're murdering small businesses. They're literally taking small businesses out behind the building and they're shooting them with a 9mm pistol in the back of the head. They're destroying with their policies small business, which destroys job creation and moves the power to the big corporates. And the corporates are sitting there indebted like they've never been in history. And their sales aren't rising and they're cutting people and they're cutting costs and they're going to AI. This is not conducive of a strong economy. And yes, it's a ticking time bomb. We don't know the day that this explodes, but just suffice it to say, it just takes one spark. And that spark, like I said, is going to be a bank failure or something along those lines. And this whole thing's just going to go boom because the stage has already been set. The underlying factors have already taken place and are taking place. But because we haven't had that big stock market crash or that big treasury market failure or that bank going under, the public is just going along like, oh, it's all good. Going into the holiday season, it's all good. New administration going to solve everything. And what I've said in several interviews since Trump got elected was that he can't stop it. He's the president. He's not the House. He doesn't control spending. He doesn't pass those bills. He can veto some stuff. He can use the bully pulpit. He's not the Fed, but he's not the Treasury. Can he appoint people? Sure. Well, Powell's got 2 more years. And Powell's already said, I ain't leaving. Tough taco time, and unless there's some sort of gross malfeasance, he's not getting Powell out. Even if you change the Treasury Secretary, that's in and of itself is not going to reverse 12 years of crap since the Federal Reserve in 1913. So I realize he's the great hope, but it's too little too late.
Hey guys, quick pause. I won't take too much of your time, but if you're looking to add into your gold and silver stack, please consider Miles Franklin. More specifically, email them, info@milesfranklin.com, and tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you in the subject line to unlock special pricing that you won't find on the website. In the unlikely event that you don't like the prices, you could always not buy. There's no commitment necessary, but I do recommend Miles Franklin for a number of reasons. The customer support is top notch, the prices are great, and I know the people there. Great people all around. So with all that said, let's get back to the video. Thanks, guys. What's the aftermath look like after a crisis like this? What does the United States and even the world look like after the collapse happens?
Well, it's going to be a reconfiguration, and part of the reconfiguration has already occurred. You've had the trade networks, you've had the currency networks, you've had all that stuff going on in the background, all that kind of stuff. But what will happen is capital will flow from bad areas to good areas. So you see the capital flow to the yuan and to the BRICS and to their gold digital currency if they ever get it done. They've talked about it for 2 years now. You'll see capital flow that way. You'll see capital destruction here. You'll see massive collapse of business. You'll see the debt will have a reconciliation because the debt cannot be paid. They'll try to hyperinflate it away. Once the currency dies, they're still going to have debt. They're going to have to go through a series of either jubilees or restructurings. I mean, Chapter 11 on steroids at a national level. And you'll see states and local municipalities go bankrupt because they're holding a bunch of this debt and on their books, and a lot of it's adjustable rate, by the way. By the way, my local school district and my local city township, who we have great financials, but they've got adjustable rate debt because, it's cheaper. It's cheaper than fixed rate debt. And they've just been piling on adjustable rate debt for the last few years in these bond elections. And I'm like, are you guys nuts? You know what happens to that when the economy doesn't do well? So you're going to see local municipalities go bankrupt. You're going to see water systems for sale. You're going to see the electrical grid for sale. You're going to see government-owned assets and fire sales go to private entities. You've got the Chinese who have bought so much land that they can literally set up shop and control agriculture now in the United States because of how much land they own. So you're going to be fighting international interest, taking your sovereign productive capacity and us trying to grab that back and say, wait a minute, we're sorry, you can't own all this. We got to build our own infrastructure. It's going to be ugly and nasty, and the people that protect themselves with gold and silver, get out of debt, will be better off. But it's still going to be long lines at the grocery store, supply chain disruptions, loss of jobs, people making fun. What people may not be prepared for, even if you prepare for the financial stuff, is the culture and political stuff. Our political system is going to burn on fire. And at some point in time, we're going to have a national conversation about why did this happen? And we're going to talk about term limits, and we're going to talk about campaign funding, and we're going to be forced to do it to weed out all the damn corruption. And culturally, we're going to be a dumpster fire, and everybody's going to point and laugh at us. And our identity will be rooted in this embarrassment. On the flip side of that, after a period of years, probably 8 to 10, we'll rebuild, and we'll rebuild with pride based on some of the original founding principles. This is the history of nation states, if you look at them. Sir John Glubb certainly has done this research. You can do it on your own. That's the cycle we're in. It's the crash, it's the embarrassment, it's the we'll never do this again, much like the Germans after the Nazis. We'll never do this again. And then the rebuild of productive capacity. Look at what Germany is now. It's the economic engine of Europe. If as Germany goes, goes Europe and the euro. Well, they had national embarrassment, reparations, and all this stuff, and then they rebuilt it. So we'll rebuild, but there's going to be a lot of that kind of stuff going on as we go through all this. And protect yourself financially. The best way that you know how, I'm not a financial advisor. I do it gold, silver. You do it however you want. I would stay away from Bitcoin. I know Bitcoin's going up, but I'm telling you, it's turned into a national Ponzi. It is between the ETFs, which have centralized finance in Bitcoin. It may be a decentralized coin, but the money coming in ain't decentralized. It's now being concentrated through the financial sector, been financialized. And the government getting involved, I'm not sure that BTC, that fork of Bitcoin, is stable. If you're going to do cryptos, I might look somewhere else. Do what you got to do to protect yourself, but also understand all this other stuff is going to occur. There's going to be political risk, cultural risk, supply chain risk. And those are things that just having gold and silver by itself won't solve. So then you got to get your hands dirty and say, how am I going to prepare for all this stuff? And how long is it going to last? And, how do I handle job income? Those are things that people need to think about. They need to get beyond just investing in some metal. They need to say, okay, what's next steps for me? Because when you look at like the Great Depression or even the Great Recession or any sort of collapse like this, it goes beyond just the money. It goes into culture and politics and all that kind of stuff. So that's really where people need to start focusing. And that's why I kind of morphed my channel from Gold, Silver, Pros to the Freedom Report, because beyond finance, there's all these other things that we need, to talk about that are going to affect us that we need to be aware of.
Does it behoove one to stay in Sorry, does it behoove one to stay in the United States despite all of these warning signs? In other words, is it advantageous to geographically just look for other options in the meantime as we go through this collapse?
Yeah, what I call the expat industry has exploded in recent years. People are moving to different locations, or they're planting flags. They may have a banking flag in Ecuador. They may have a residency flag in Chile, and they may have, businesses in, I don't know, Australia or New Zealand or even in Europe or something. The visas, the passports, that whole industry for expats has exploded. You've got huge expat populations everywhere I go. Well, I was just in the Middle East. Guess what? Abu Dhabi and Dubai have expat populations. Uruguay, Paraguay, St. Kitts and Nevis, Mexico. Like, there are people leaving the United States for greener pastures because they perceive less risk, whether it be banking risk or political risk or whatever, geopolitical risk, whatever. Um, you can stay here and plant different flags other places and physically live here, or you can physically move somewhere else and plant your banking, and investment flags elsewhere. But that whole industry, I've been following that industry for 15 years, and the last 2 years it's gone nuts. There are so many companies that have been stood up that will literally take you by the hand and say, we'll take you to this country and we'll show you everything you know to get your visa, your passport, your residency, your bank account, buy a piece of property, and here's the package cost. $40,000. Boom, you have your new life. And we didn't have that 15 years ago the way that it is now. So that whole industry is thriving because people with any means are a lot of them are looking at it. Even people that haven't moved yet. I know a lot of very wealthy people that have come to me and said, how do I do this? And I said, that's not really my bailiwick, but let me show you these companies and you go figure it out. People with money, professionals, white collar workers are starting to look at this. The one thing you have to be kind of careful of is if you do leave the U.S. and renounce citizenship, they come after you from a tax perspective and an asset perspective. So there are all sorts of legalities around that. Personally, I wouldn't do it. Just not, I'm gonna route the storm here. But a lot of people are doing it, and that industry has exploded. And certainly there's a lot of legitimacy to saying, even if you're staying here, plant some of your flags, your financial flags, certainly, in other places, and maybe give yourself a place you can go if things get hot, where you can go, sit on a beach or have a little cabin or something, that has become super popular in recent years.
So, I mean, I know you said you're just going to plant your flag here and wait out the storm, but
Yeah.
what is your game plan? You don't have to go into specifics, but what are you kind of, how are you kind of positioning yourself given what you know?
Well, I've told this story. I'm going to tell you a bit of a story before I tell you the answer. I started prepping way back when, and probably 2009. But I got serious in 2014. I graduated from military college. My master's is in cybersecurity from Norwich. Norwich is private military. I was on a two uh, non-government or non-military people in that program for that year for cyber. And when I graduated, we went on campus and we had this little week-long thing, and I joined all these classes, and I was in one class, and there was a European diplomat and some of the college bigwigs, and they were talking about when World War III was going to come. And it was basically, they said it'll start Europe and the Middle East. And guess what? We have Europe and the Middle East going. Does that mean World War III is coming? I don't know. But ever since I came out of that shocked. It wasn't just about we think this could happen. It was it's inevitable. When's it going to happen, and what's going to be the spark that lights the powder keg? And some of my friends were like, prepare, prepare, prepare when I went on campus because they were in the military. Some were military intelligence, some were Homeland Security. And they were saying, Rob, you might want to. So I was privy to information 10 years ago that a lot of people didn't know until the last 2 years. They've started to figure out. The geopolitical tension is sky high. And so I prepped. And so I did the water and food and all that kind of stuff. And then I did the gold and silver. Those are things that you can do to kind of prep in place to give yourself a moat, both physically and financially to prepare. Spiritually, I came back, to God in the last few years because of what I saw going on, and because I just was going to do that anyways. You mature, sometimes you focus on that. So I came back to God a lot spiritually to prepare. I had a friend from Argentina that went through the peso crisis. We just interviewed him in Spain for the TV series, by the way. And this is the third time I interviewed him, this time in person. The other two times were on YouTube. And he says, spiritually, Rob, that's the number one thing. When you're going through a collapse of your economy, and he went through it in 2000, he said spiritually and your relationship with your friends and your family is the most important because that's your support network. You can do all the physical stuff you want, but if you don't prepare spiritually and you don't prepare with your network and your friends and your support network, that's where things get very, very difficult. So I would say there's a layer beyond just the physical that people need to look at and say, where do I need to go in my head and in my heart that I'm prepared for whatever happens? And then I can get through whatever happens. And I have the support network of people that I trust and love. And that was the biggest thing from Fernando, who went through the peso crisis, is you can do all the prep stuff you want. He writes books on it. He's got like a whole prepper channels of hundreds of thousands of people that follow him in Spanish and in English. This guy's got, he's got it down. And he's got books published on Amazon. But he's like, Rob, it's spiritual and family that I probably, if I had to change it, would have done more than any other, because it's the mind and the way that you react to things, which is going to determine your ability to deal with them and have success, whether it be financially or in any other measure.
Yeah, that's really the constitution of an individual is a spirituality. Well, Rob, it's been a pleasure having you on. Anything else
Yeah.
that you want to cover before we wrap things up?
I would just say, I said 2024 would be the year of volatility. It has been. We've seen that. 2025 is going to be the first stages of the collapse. I don't know if the whole thing will come, but you're going to see it right in your face. And the geopolitical tensions will rise. And so this is the year, if you're sitting there on your couch, you're watching this video and you're going, yeah, I haven't done anything, man, you better do it now. 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 I told one of my groups that I work with independently, just independent people, I told all of them, I said, do it now. You're running out of time to prepare financially. What I have seen as I've traveled around the world and talked to people is there is desperation in these markets. It is desperate. We're at the quite before the storm, if you will. We're in the eye of the hurricane. It's going to get rocky, and it's going to come fast, and it's going to start next year. And if you're not prepared, if you haven't done the work, man, you're not going to have time. So enjoy your holidays, enjoy your new year, and then January 1 or January 2nd, if you will, after the new year, man, put some time to figuring out what you need to do financially and otherwise, because you're out of time at this point.
Wow. I mean, aside from the Bitcoin stuff, where else do you see desperation in the market?
Desperation in the treasury markets, desperation even in the gold markets, because people are like, why is it not turning? And people are giving up their gold. There is desperation across every financial market. And when I talk to people that are politically connected, they just look at me like they know the stuff is about to hit the fan geopolitically. Um, I can't say who I'm connected with, but I will just say this. The world has been lit on fire, and we're not going to put that out. Um, Geopolitically, stuff's going to come down, and the die has been cast. We're not going back. We're not going back to where we were the last 30 years geopolitically. There's a huge realignment. There's hot wars coming. There's massive political wars coming, sanctions, collapsing markets. We're just in that frame, like we were, back in the Great Depression and World War II. We're back in that frame of things. And once that gets lit, you ain't stopping it. The pieces that have been put into place, it's like a ball rolling downhill. You get in front of it, you get run over. Just prepare for that. Prepare that people know that the trade wars, the currency wars, and the hot wars are going to take a tick up. And it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. And I don't say that to scare people. I just know that's coming. And people know, and they're running around desperately trying to make preparations. The war spending has gone up the last few years demonstrably across the war. Europe has been rampant spending on defense, rampant. You've got countries like Poland desperately trying to buy F-35s and can't get enough of them because the F-35, the best thing that ever happened to the Americans' weapons program was the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East, and they can't keep up with production. We cannot produce enough jets, fighters, and bombs. The United States is actually depleted on a lot of this stuff through the Ukraine war. The war industry is going to ramp. And if you do want to invest in stocks, I'm not a stock person, but look at the defense industry. That thing is going to go bonkers the next several years as people ramp up their spending. And there's desperation around that. What's that going to look like? How does NATO react to what's going on in Russia? How do the Americans react to what's going on with Israel and their leaders? Biden said, "Hey, pull back. You're going too far." Well, they ain't stopping, and neither are the other guys. So, and like I said, that's thousands of years old. You ain't stopping that. You ain't stopping it. And when I went over to the Middle East, man, people were like, a lot of the expats I knew that are sitting there in the UAE are like, should I leave? Should I stay? Under the surface, there is a lot of fear and desperation, and I need to do something right now to change my situation. And I see it in a lot of different areas. And unfortunately, there's certain things I can't talk about. I can't. But just suffice it to say, if 2024 was a year of volatility, 2025 is going to be the year of in your face, you never thought you were going to see it happen stuff. And you're going to see it happen. And it's going to shock a ton of people.
Hmm. What are these, if you don't mind me asking, what are these political connections that you have? What are they doing to prepare exactly? If you can divulge any of that.
Well, some of them are thinking about exiting out of politics because they think that the system may be beyond repair and they need to protect their own families. Some of the political contacts are telling me that they're all aligning for certain activities. Uh, and I'm not saying I have a hotline to the White House. I'm just telling you I know people in the political sphere through some of the nonprofit work I've done, through school, through things like that. And people are telling me that the U.S. government's making tons of preparations with supplies. For example, they're moving military stuff around in the U.S. Um, the political sense in Europe is that whole thing's about to erupt into some sort of war around Russia, Ukraine, but extending into some of the NATO countries. You've got countries trying to desperately get into NATO. You've got countries like Poland buying as much defense as they can because they know who was the first one invaded during World War II. Poland's sitting there going, we need to protect ourselves. There's so much stuff I want to say, but just suffice it to say the Middle East, people that live in the Middle East that I know that live there that I recently talked to are on edge because they don't know about their personal safety because of what's going on around them. It looks as though with what's going on in Syria, Turkey and Syria and Russia are all aligning. You're starting to see it's almost biblical, and I don't want to go there on this program, but I will tell you this: there have been some prophecies about things that you will see happen that have started to happen with geopolitical alignment in the Middle East that are starting to worry people. That they're like they didn't want this to happen. And I think even people in the United States didn't want to see it happen, even though the United States probably antagonizes that region more than anybody else. They didn't want to see it happen. Like it's gone too far. And the Bidens pushed it too far. They're not the only ones to blame. I'm just saying, as of recently, they pushed it too far and they're trying to pull it back and they can't now. Like I said, that powder keg has been lit. That whole area has been lit. It's lit. And the people there know it. And they'll tell you privately, they're worried. They're like, can I get a visa? Can I go to the US? Where can I afford to go? There's a lot of fear. And governments are realigning their spending, not just on defense, but they're realigning their spending on their capital markets. They're realigning their spending in energy and on certain goods they need for their industry to run. A lot of industries are prepping for a wartime environment very quietly. The United States is quietly prepping for a wartime environment, especially in the defense industry, but that's being pushed out to other industries as well. So you can kind of see that all forming, and a lot of people that are kind of connected to this going, I don't know if I want to be here. The problem is like, where do you go? We were talking about planting flags before. The reason I'm going to stay here is like, where am I going to go? Am I going to be safer in Australia? Well, you got China. They're an antagonist to Australia and to Taiwan. Like, do I want to mess with China? They've wanted Australia for forever. What if I go to Europe? Is that safe? I talked to some friends in Europe and they're like, well, I don't know where to go in Europe. Am I safe here? Do I go here? Like, people are like, I just don't know. There's that sort of trepidation going on. And the politicals in each country, all the rhetoric has changed around the world, not just in the Middle East, not just in Ukraine. It's changed around the world. You have a revolt going on against Trudeau in Canada, where that country is literally burning on fire. Politically, Canada is a big what do you call it? A bonfire. And I know people in Canada are desperately trying to get to the States. I know friends that are very wealthy in Canada are like, I just want to abandon my home and get out of this. It's nuts what's going on in Canada. And there's going to be so many expats from Canada to the United States in the next few years. It's going to shock people. I have people I know that live in the US that are trying to go to Mexico that are well off and have businesses, and they're just like, I'm done. I want to go to Mexico, or I want to get out of this place. Um, you just see it. You see it everywhere. And because of what I've done the last few years in some of the associations and industries, I've been privy to certain things that not everybody gets privy to. I'm not saying I know everything, but I've just been privy to some things. And wealthy people and politically connected people are putting their ducks in a row right now. And it goes back to that planting the flag argument, but it also goes back to how the heck do I protect myself? That's
It,
going on.
it,
And I know a lot of physicians in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and man, prepper mode. You're talking about rich physicians making millions of dollars in prepper mode, baby. I'm talking beans, bullets, and bullion. I'm just saying that the people that are connected know what's coming and they're prepping. And everybody's trying to figure out, where do I go? How do I do it?
right. Is there a chance? I mean, you mentioned a potential expected outflow of Canada into the United States.
Mhm.
In much the same way, capital seems to be dumping into the American markets right now. Is there
Yeah.
a chance that the world just panics and just coalesces around the United States, and that effectively, ends up buying us a few more years in the process?
Not the BRICS nations, but you will see a lot in the Blue Dot Network, like Japan, Australia, some of our allies, 100%, some of Europe. What you're going to see is regionalization. What I saw when I went to Bitcoin MENA was they're having financial conferences, or not only Bitcoin, but a big financial conference. They're regionalizing the financial conversation around the world. And so it won't just be the United States. Everybody's regionalizing their trade. Everybody's regionalizing their currency agreements. United States isn't. The United States is still trying to police the whole world. But yeah, there will be people that come to the US and say it's the most stable. And I will say this, the dollar will be the most stable currency until it's not. It will be probably the last man standing, but it ain't going to last forever. No fiat currency does. And yes, there will be a flood of capital and a flood of interest in the US. We're having immigration like never before. But when that dollar dies, it's going to be a giant sucking sound of people worry about immigration. And I do because I live in Texas and you see it and you see some of the crime and things like that. The Venezuelan gangs taking over an apartment complex 10 miles from where I live. Yes, that did happen and it was on the news. Okay. And yes, they took it over with machine guns and it took weeks for the authorities to get them out.
What happens to
Yes,
them
that's
now?
real.
What
And
happens
yes,
to
it's
them
on my
now?
news. But what's going to happen is giant sucking sound because as soon as the dollar collapses, all those people that came are like, oh, we're going back. Because, unless the ones that want to stay and rebuild. Now, there'll be huge opportunity for people that want to stay and rebuild. And manufacturing is going to come back. But people are coming here because they think we're a safe haven. Wait till that dollar crashes. Nah, nope. That illusion will be wiped away very quickly.
Totally. Well, hey, Rob, where can people find you?
They can find me in the Freedom Report. So it's freedom underscore RPT, I think, on YouTube. I don't remember, and freedom underscore RPT on Twitter. You can find us. We haven't done as many videos recently because I've been traveling to film the TV series, which I can't talk too much about, but I will starting in about March of next year. We'll give you the lowdown on where that's going to air and what we're doing. We're talking about sound money. So I haven't done as much content lately, but I'll get back into it with the new year. And I usually do 1 to 2 videos a week. Mostly it's financial, but we started talking about some of these other things we've talked about today. So you can just look me up there.
Awesome. We'll link it down below, so be sure to check it out, guys. Rob, thank you so much for coming on. If you guys enjoyed this video, give us a like and type "Go Rob Go" in the comment section if you agreed with Rob's takes. If you disagreed with anything, however, let me know. I do read the comments, so I'm super interested to get your guys' take here. Are we heading for collapse? Is the U.S. salvageable? Let me know in the comments down below. If you'd like to support the channel even further, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a video. Also, check us out on Substack, capitalcosm.substack.com, where you can get early access and ad-free versions of all of my videos. And then finally, if you want to support the channel even more so monetarily, then check out our good friends at Miles Franklin, info@milesfranklin.com, and email them. Tell them that Capital Cosm sent you in the subject line and get special pricing on gold and silver that you won't find on their website. And so with all that said, thanks guys for watching, and I'll catch you next episode. Bye, y'all.